Welcome. I'm very excited today. I'm talking about a topic that it always is interesting to me how much this topic bothers people and how little people really want to look in the mirror, because this is a look in the mirror kind of situation. We're talking about toxicity. We all know what toxic leadership is, and none of us want to think that we are toxic in our leadership. And there are times that you might find that you are. And we're going to look at that and how to identify when we are in a kind of a toxic behavior and what to do about it, so that we can create safe and empowering environments for the people that we work with and that we work around, people that work for us. Also, this is for an up and downs. By creating this kind of environment, it impacts the people above us, it impacts our clients, it impacts ourselves, our own nervous system. So let's take a look at some of the toxicity that may be happening in our leadership. Okay, so first thing I really, really want to do is to stress that this is not about labeling yourself good or bad, or, I'm a good leader, I'm a bad leader, whatever the case is. That's not what this is about. This is really about understanding that our behaviors are learned. Most toxic leadership is unconscious. It's learned behavior. There are people, of course, that it's not. However, in most cases, it's from a learned behavior, a learned pattern. And many of us women have learned survival strategies that look like leadership. So some people might praise us as good leaders, but it's really not. Right? So toxic leadership isn't about intent. It's about the impact. Right? So when our leadership is toxic, it impacts the people around us and it impacts us. So I'm inviting you to stay brave enough, right? To be brave enough to stay in the conversation here. And if you are, then you're already more conscious than a lot of people. So, okay, now that we have that out of the way, there's no blaming, no shaming happening here. It's a recognition that there are behaviors that we've learned and it's time to change. Okay, so the first thing really about toxic leadership is that it's really driven by our bodies being dysregulated, our nervous system being out of sync, right? So we've learned these behaviors that have put us in a protective mode in some way, shape, or form, whether it's protecting us, from fight, flight, freeze, but something that has created this environment where we are not fully aligned with our higher selves. And so when that happens, that kind of behavior, it's a control used to create a safety for us, right? So we learn these behaviors as children, right? To keep ourselves safe from whatever's happening around us. Those behaviors that we have learned pour into our leadership if we remain unconscious of it. So that emotional doing here is replacing that emotional pressure with clarity. And that's really what this is all about. So one of the to recognize is what once protected you, what might have protected you as a child, as a teenager. Like for me, keeping small kept me safe, right? It kept me out of the line of the bullies, kept me out of line from the people that were harming me. That smallness can poison the culture in the working environment, okay? And they show up in a wide variety of ways. Sometimes you might be surprised. Well, sometimes it might be some of the things that you don't expect it to be. So I'm going to list a couple and see what you think about it, right? So micromanaging, right? So we think we're helping by micromanaging, but we're not, right? That's a toxic behavior when we're micromanaging everything that somebody else is doing or a lot of somebody else's are. Now, it might be important to micromanage when we're first teaching somebody or training somebody, so that understanding where there's a difference is important, right? However, micromanaging in general is a toxic behavior. People-pleasing. People-pleasing can be quite toxic because there's no boundaries. When we're in a people-pleasing kind of position, we don't have boundaries. We've been talking about that in the challenge this week. So, right, people are starting to understand, the women that are in the challenge are starting to understand where they could place some boundaries and maybe not be so people-pleasing, and how that might show up in a toxic kind of way. Avoiding hard conversations is another, boy, right? That avoidance factor. That was me. By trying to stay small and under the radar, avoiding those hard conversations can really have an impact on your leadership. And it doesn't help your leadership to avoid those conversations. When you're in that kind of position, pay attention. If you're avoiding talking to that person because they're not getting something done, what's showing up for you? Where is that showing up in your body? Why is that showing up? Perhaps that comes from, like in my case, staying small in a childhood. Maybe speaking up got you in trouble when you were a kid. So if you're avoiding talking to your employee about the late reports, or you're avoiding talking to that other employee about all of the gossip that's happening within the department, that's a toxic behavior, and it's allowing toxic behavior. Explosive reactions. You're in a position where you just explode. I rarely am that way in work. And if I am, I've been pushed to a limit. Now, in my home life, before, it came up quite a bit more often. Not proud of it is what it is. I did it. I've learned from it. I've shifted out of it. And so now if I end up in an explosive reaction, then it's because I've been pushed all the way up against the wall and it's protecting me. Is it right? Well, there might be other ways of dealing with it. In fact, there are other ways of dealing with it. And so looking at it when you're in the working environment, if you have an explosive reaction to something, or an employee has an explosive reaction to something, it creates a toxic environment. I was creating that in my home. So I've worked very hard to shift out of that, right? Or emotional withdrawal. This surprises some people because when we emotionally withdraw, because women, we are emotional beings, right? We are emotional. We have empathy. We have compassion. We have feelings. And when we choose to withdraw from that and expressing that in our leadership, that shows up in a toxic way because now there's no connection. I want to really emphasize these are patterns, learned behaviors. They are not your identity. It's a learned behavior. It can be unlearned. Right? So here are some signs that you might be leading from some of these toxic patterns. Okay. You feel responsible for everyone's emotions. Okay. You soften your message to avoid discomfort. You don't want to come across as hurting somebody's feelings. You over-explain yourselves. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You absorb the emotional fallout of something that's going on. And when you do that, the emotional boundaries are not safe for you or the people around you. And when you take away and you step over emotional boundaries like that, that creates a toxic environment. Okay. So using and stepping into some of your power language is a really powerful thing for you to do. So a really good example is I had an employee. He wanted to know how he was doing. He's a very good employee, but he also had a lot of insecurities. And I knew this, right? I knew that he had these insecurities. So I asked him, I said, how honest do you want me to be? He said, I want you to be brutal. Now, here's the interesting thing. We can be brutally honest without being cruel, right? So as I was speaking with him, I didn't soften the message. I delivered it with compassion. There's a difference. I didn't feel it necessary to over-explain. I just simply gave the information. And if he needed more information, he asked for it, okay? And I let him feel his feelings, right? I didn't apologize for it. These were my observations of how he was doing. He was doing a great job. He just had some things to learn. He now has taken on a major leadership role in another company. You know, he didn't have advancement opportunities within mine, moved on to another one, and I'm so very proud of him. Okay. So these are things when I could have been cruel with my words. And what would that have accomplished? That would have absolutely crushed him, right? And that would have ended up, he probably would still be working for me, or he wouldn't be in a leadership role because it could have destroyed him. Instead, I chose a different way. Okay. Another thing, the next one, Second sign, right? You default to control when things feel uncertain. So if you're not certain of how something goes on, you micromanage everything, right? If you're not sure of the outcome of something, you micromanage, or you need to approve everything. Everything has to cross your desk. Okay. You become the bottleneck in that. You have a difficult time delegating to someone else. These are signs that there might be some toxicity in your behavior, in your leadership. Okay. So shift away from control into a capacity. What is your capacity to maintain this without burnout? Delegate. That's what leaders do. We delegate. The third sign you might be leading in a toxic way is you avoid conflict. Right? You avoid conflict because you're resentful. There's silence, frustration. There's an emotional kind of reaction going on. You pull away from somebody, and you start to feel resentful because they haven't approached you and said what's going on, or they might feel resentful because you haven't said anything. Right? That creates a toxic environment. So stop and think about some of the places where you've been, some of the things that you've encountered, either you've done or has been done to you, or somebody has withdrawn from you. They just avoid, like in the working place, that can be really toxic because people don't know where they stand. People don't know where they stand. So early clarity prevents this, right? So early clarity in a situation when there's frustration or conflict, having the conversation early in the game can prevent this kind of resentment building up. Fourth sign, right, is your language carries pressure or guilt. I need you to is one of my least favorite phrases in the working environment. I need you to get that report done. I need you to get that whatever done. I need you to a power structure that allows for a guilt and shame kind of relationship between the person who says, I need you to, and the person who's being told that this has to happen. Right. So when you ask for something in a neutral, task-centered language, this report needs to get done, as opposed to, I need you to get this report done. Right. So if you're using that kind of language, that creates a power dynamic where you're in the controlled position, then that can create a toxic environment. Okay? Because it allows for guilt, it allows for shame, it allows for blame, and there's a lot of pressure. Fifth one, similar to another one, is you're the bottleneck, right? Everything funnels through you, all the information funnels through you, all of the approvals funnel through you. Right? If you're the bottleneck, then there's a toxin, potentially a toxicity. Now, there might be a reason that something has to funnel through you. There have been times within my business where the client specifically requested me for something, in which case everything had to come through me, right? Or somebody's out because they're ill, so everything has to come through you for a short period of time. But when they come back, you happily put things back on their plate. Okay, so there might be some situations where everything has to funnel through you, and that's different than you intentionally making everything funnel through you. Right? So that's the fifth. You're the bottleneck. And that leads to exhaustion, by the way. You feel like you're needed. See how much I love that word? You're needed, right? But when you empower others, it builds confidence in them. It builds trust. Creates a whole different level of confidence because now you've built the capabilities within your employees. So you have the confidence in your employees. You have trust in your employees, right? And they feel empowered. So they feel like they have more confidence, which means that they can trust you more. So if you're the bottleneck, there's probably some toxicity there. The sixth thing that might be a sign that you're leading in a toxic manner without realizing it is that you take things personally. And if you're taking things personally, then I invite you to step back and to ask yourself why. If somebody misses a deadline and it feels disrespectful, why? Why do you feel like they're disrespecting you? A missed deadline is a missed deadline. Maybe they needed more support. Maybe they needed some more clarity and they felt unsafe coming to you to ask for that, right? This was one I struggled with. I will say, I struggled with this early in my career in taking things personally, right? So when somebody gave me feedback, I I felt very threatened by it. I had a junior employee give me some feedback and I had to sit with it because it felt threatening and felt like she was somehow dissing me, right? And after I sat with it and was brutally honest with myself about it, I realized that what she had to say, there was a lot to it. So separating my identity from the outcome of what was happening was really important for me to be able to do. And I learned a valuable lesson from that. So if you're taking things personally, ask yourself, where's the truth in what's being said here? You might not like it. However, there's a lot of growth there. Okay, and the seventh thing is that your nervous system sets the tone. So if your nervous system, if you walk into an environment, into the working place and you're upset about something, there's some tension, some urgency, maybe you brought something from home, right? There might be an emergency going on at home and you bring it into work, right? So this is a situation where that can create a toxic environment without you even realizing it, right? Because people are walking on eggshells around you and nobody quite knows why. Knowing how to regulate your nervous system is really important because it helps to set the tone within your working environment. And you as a leader, that's your responsibility to set the tone for your place of employment. Now, if you're not the person who's in charge, you can still help shift the environment in which you're working based on these things, recognizing these different things. So you can still be a leader within your organization without being the leader, right? First thing, just a recap real here, you feel responsible for everybody's emotions. You're not, okay? So shift away from that. Allow the emotional boundaries to happen. Second thing, you default to control when things feel uncertain. Really focus on capacity, building the capacity in your team, making sure that you're not taking on too much and now you have no capacity yourself. You avoid conflict, right? Creating some resentment there. Get some clarity early on when there's any kind of conflict. If you can have the conversation early, you can avoid most of the conflict. Fourth thing, the language carries field, so creating that power structure. So now if you're not the person in the leadership role and somebody says, hey, I need you to do this, right? You can say, well, let's just say somebody says, Susie, I need you to get that report done by close of business today. You can say, okay, so the report needs to be done by 5. I have these other things going on today. What would you like me to prioritize? Right, so you have, even if you're not the person in the leadership role, you have the capacity to help shift the language. And now you're leading, that's not a real word, but right, leading your boss, your leadership, the people above you in how they can structure this, right? So language. If you're the bottleneck, everything funnels through you. Why? Build the capacity of the other people, delegate things. Take things personally, look in a mirror. And if your nervous system is a problem, do some homework. Clean it up, right? Clean up your nervous system. Okay, so why do these patterns develop? Why do these patterns develop? A lot of these are survival strategies that we've learned, right? We've learned these strategies at home. We've learned these strategies in the workplace, male-dominated environments. They lead differently than women do. It's just the reality of things. If there has been any place that you've been where there's been an unsafe authority dynamic, you've learned some of these behaviors from them. Now, whether you took it on knowingly, unknowingly, or not, right, it happens. If it's a high-pressure culture, right, the business itself is a high-pressure culture, then these patterns can develop over time. So staying aware, shifting from these can really help you. Now, women often succeed despite these systems, not because of them. When you learn how to shift out of these survival modes that you have, then you're going to be much more successful. That's just the reality of it, right? So when I first started my business, my other business in gas and oil, some of these behaviors were behaviors that I knew I didn't want to bring into my working place, but I found them slipping in various places in little ways. Right? Sometimes a little more dynamic than I thought. And sometimes they showed up and it was a surprise. These are things that we have to constantly be on the lookout for in our leadership. Right? It's not an excuse. It's just a reality. Okay. You didn't learn these behaviors because you're toxic. You learned them because they worked in the environment that you were in. Just the way it is. So again, no blame, no shame, no guilt. That's part of life. Now let's unlearn them. So how to shift without the shame? Awareness before action. Awareness, pause. Notice where you feel something in your body, right? So I have spoken many times about figuring out where you feel different emotions in your body, right? If you're feeling attacked, then learn to recognize that. If you're starting to feel a knot in your stomach, ask yourself where that's coming from. Give yourself a moment to pause. Now, if you happen to be in a meeting, literally taking a breath, right? So this has been proven. I've used this myself, and it's been proven through all kinds of studies. But if you stop and breathe in, hold it and breathe out, and you do that 2 or 3 times, right? It recenters the room, not just you. It recenters the room, especially if you're in a leadership role. Right? So give yourself pause. Give yourself permission to take pause. Notice where you're feeling that. Notice the pattern. Name it in your head. What pattern am I stepping into, right? And then next, go on from there, right? Clean up your language. Remove the blame language, right? So this is, if you can, in your mind, when you're speaking to somebody, if you realize that you're doing this at them with your words, you should have done this. Why didn't you do that? How come you did this? I don't understand why you did that, right? So this is this. And when there's this kind of language, it's a blame language, right? So we want to shift away from the blame language. Remove those kinds of emotional blockages that are happening here and really center on the task. Okay, the report didn't get done. How can we get this done? What is the next step? Do you need some support? Do we need to prioritize a couple of things? So focus on the task and the task getting done as opposed to the person and them getting it done, right? And recognize that regulation is a leadership skill, okay? Right? Regulation is a leadership skill. So calm, when you're calm, is contagious. So when you're calm, that's why taking that breath in a meeting or in a conversation with somebody who's kind of feeling like, oh my God, I didn't get that report done and now she's going to be mad at me, right? When you remain calm, you take a breath, it's contagious. Your presence, when you're present, when you're fully engaged in a conversation with somebody, you're there, not staring off in the distance over here somewhere, or leaning back or, tapping your pen, which, by the way, I've had people do at me, right? When you're looking at the person, you're making eye contact, you might look down to write something and look up at them, right? When you're present, it regulates your nervous system and helps regulate theirs, creates a safe space. And this is important. That's the kind of leadership that is non-toxic. So a really good example of this, by the way, I had an employee. Actually, I was working on a team. I'm going to tell you this one. This is a better one. No, I'm going to tell you this one. I had an employee that during a meeting, was kind of staring off into space, doing whatever, tapping, kind of like this. It's hard to not take something like that personally when they act bored with the meeting that's going on. It was a training session, actually. And so, what I ended up doing is kind of feeling into my body, what's going on here. Where am I feeling this? I'm feeling my resentment kind of come up. I'm feeling some of these emotions happening. I was taking things personally. My nervous system was kind of like this. So I had a couple of patterns triggering for me. So what I did, I took notice of it. I breathed, right? It says, hey, can we have a conversation on a break? We had a conversation. I said, hey, come here a minute. I just want to find out what's happening here. I've noticed that you're really kind of not here during the training. What it feels like something's off. And so by me approaching him that way, my girlfriend broke up with me and I was just getting ready to ask her to marry me. Right? So he was totally not present. It had nothing to do with me, had nothing to do with the work. Right? So I felt these emotions coming up and I took note of where I was feeling these things and instead of the blame language. Hey, you're not paying any attention. What gives? Instead, I was like, it feels like there's something going on because you're not quite present. Are you okay? And yeah, found out that as a matter of fact, he wasn't okay. Right. So pay attention. Okay. Shift without shame. So I'm going to ask which one of these hit a little close for you. So I'd love to hear more. Drop a number in the chat when you're listening on the replay, because most of you are on the replay. And let me know which one of these 7 hit home for you. I'd love to know. So it is possible to shift our leadership, right? It is possible to shift our leadership and support people without fixing every little problem.